Doctors stunned when woman delivers a baby with feathered arms. How is this even possible? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room flickered slightly, casting an unnatural glow on the sterile walls. Sophia Carter, a 28-year-old first-time mother, gripped the edges of the hospital bed as another wave of pain shot through her body. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead, and she gasped for breath, her husband Daniel holding her hand tightly. "You're doing great, Sophia. Just keep breathing," the nurse encouraged, checking the monitor beside her. But something was different. The medical staff had noticed it hours earlier. This labor wasn't progressing like any other. Sophia had been in labor for nearly 20 hours, and still, the baby hadn't fully descended. The contractions were irregular, and each time the doctors checked the baby's position, there was an unexplainable resistance. "Doctor, her vitals are stable, but the baby's still not shifting position," one of the nurses informed Dr. Peterson, the head OB/GYN overseeing the delivery. Dr. Peterson frowned as he adjusted his mask, studying the ultrasound results with growing confusion. The baby was positioned correctly, yet something was preventing a normal delivery. He turned to Sophia with a reassuring smile, though the uncertainty in his eyes was clear. "Sophia, we might need to assist with a C-section," he said calmly. "There's something unusual about the baby's positioning, and we want to ensure a safe delivery." Sophia's eyes widened in alarm. "What do you mean, unusual?" she panted. Dr. Peterson hesitated before responding. "We're not entirely sure yet, but we need to proceed carefully." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Whatever they need to do, we just want you both to be safe." Sophia swallowed her fear and nodded. "Okay, do what you need to do." The team moved quickly, preparing the operating room. Within minutes, Sophia was wheeled into surgery, her heart pounding as she was surrounded by doctors in green scrubs and masks. The anesthesia took effect, and everything blurred. Then, a moment of silence. The scalpel made the first incision, and as the doctors carefully worked to bring the baby out, gasps filled the room. The air was heavy with tension. And then a cry, a baby's first wail. But what followed left the room frozen. As Dr. Peterson gently lifted the newborn into the air, his hands trembled. The baby's arms were not arms at all. Instead, protruding from the infant's shoulders were fully formed, feathered wings. Feathers, soft and golden brown, layered delicately over strong, tiny appendages that resembled the wings of a bird rather than human limbs. The entire surgical team stood in stunned silence. Nurses exchanged wide-eyed glances, some instinctively taking a step back as if they couldn't trust what they were seeing. One of the junior doctors, Dr. Reynolds, let out a nervous laugh, as if expecting someone to reveal this was a bizarre prank. But no one did. Dr. Peterson, ever the professional, was the first to regain composure. "Is the baby breathing?" he asked, his voice tight. One of the nurses checked. Strong heartbeat. Breathing normally. Sophia, still drowsy from the medication, stirred. Is my baby okay?" she whispered. Daniel, who had been standing just outside the operating room, was allowed in. His eyes darted to his wife before falling upon the bundle in the nurse's arms. His breath caught in his throat. The baby, their son, was wrapped in a soft white hospital blanket, his small face peaceful. But the wings, they were unmistakable. "Oh my God," Daniel whispered. Sophia's head turned groggily. "Daniel?" she murmured. He hesitated. How could he explain? How could he tell her what he was seeing? That their baby, the child they had dreamed of, was unlike anything the world had ever known? Dr. Peterson approached cautiously. "Sophia, your baby is healthy, but there's something you need to see." Sophia, still weak but alert enough to sense the unease, reached out. "Give him to me," she pleaded. The nurse, her hands visibly shaking, carefully placed the baby in Sophia's arms. Sophia's breath hitched the moment she saw him. Her beautiful boy, his tiny fingers curled into fists, his soft newborn skin, his perfect nose. And then, the wings. She gasped. The room was still. No one dared to speak. Her hands trembled as she reached toward them, lightly brushing her fingers over the delicate feathers. They shuddered at her touch. They were real. Her heart pounded. What is this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Daniel finally moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But I don't know." Dr. Peterson sighed, choosing his words carefully. "We've never seen anything like this before. This isn't a known genetic condition. This is," he hesitated, "unprecedented." A nurse, who had been silent until now, muttered, "It's like something out of mythology." Sophia's grip tightened around her son. "He's not a myth," she snapped. "He's my baby." Dr. Peterson nodded. "Of course. But we have to understand what this means. We need to run tests, check his health, understand his anatomy." Daniel bristled. "Tests? What kind of tests?" "Non-invasive, at first," Dr. Peterson assured him. "We need to understand how his wings are structured. Are they connected to his nervous system? Are they functional? Does he have additional muscle structures that support them?" Sophia's eyes darkened. "He's not some experiment," she said firmly. "No, he's not," Dr. Peterson agreed. "But you have to understand, if news of this gets out, there will be questions, attention, and media frenzy. We need to ensure that your son is safe." Sophia looked down at her baby, his small form pressed against her chest. He stirred slightly, his wings fluttering just the tiniest bit, as if sensing the tension in the room. The weight of what this meant crashed down on her. This wasn't just a unique birth. This was something bigger, something world-changing. And she wasn't ready. Not yet. The hospital room felt too small, suffocating under the weight of what had just happened. The doctors had stepped back, exchanging glances that were equal parts curiosity and unease. Sophia held her son tightly, her arms wrapped protectively around him as if shielding him from the uncertainty that loomed over them all. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting between the medical staff. "So what happens now?" His voice was measured, but the undercurrent of anxiety was evident. Dr. Peterson took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "We need to assess the baby's condition further. He's healthy, which is the most important thing, but we can't ignore the obvious. His wings are an anomaly, something that isn't medically documented. We need to ensure they're not affecting his overall health." Sophia's grip tightened. "He's perfect," she said fiercely, her maternal instincts kicking in full force. "No one is saying otherwise," the doctor assured her. "But think about the questions this raises. You're the first woman to ever—" Sophia cut him off. "I don't care about the questions. I care about my son." Daniel, ever the rational thinker, tried to keep his emotions in check, though he was just as overwhelmed. "Let's say we agree to testing," he said cautiously. "How do we make sure this stays private?" Dr. Peterson hesitated. "That's going to be difficult." A murmur rippled through the staff. A nurse whispered something to another, and before Sophia could process it, she realized the hospital was already talking. This was too big to keep quiet. And then the worst thought hit her. What if someone outside found out? Panic surged through her veins. She looked at her baby, his tiny, warm body nestled against hers. His wings, impossibly soft, barely moved as he breathed. The idea of him being taken away, examined like some kind of scientific marvel, made her stomach churn. Daniel saw it in her face. "No," he said, firm and resolute. "No public announcements. No leaks. We keep this between us until we figure out what this means." Dr. Peterson nodded, but there was doubt in his expression. "We can do our best, but secrets don't stay hidden forever. The moment this gets out, people will come looking for answers. The media, the government, scientists, religious groups, you name it." Sophia's breath hitched. The reality of it crashed down on her. This wasn't just about them. This was about the world. And the world was not kind to things it didn't understand. She had seen it before, stories of people who were different, of scientific phenomena being dissected, debated, used as spectacle. Her son was not a spectacle. "He's ours," she whispered. Daniel sat beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." Dr. Peterson sighed. "We'll discharge you in a few days. But I strongly recommend keeping this within your closest circle. For now, at least." Sophia nodded, exhaustion creeping in. She looked down at her son, his tiny features relaxed in sleep. He looked like any other baby, except for the extraordinary wings tucked against his back. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had changed forever. The first week. For 2 days, they tried to live in secrecy. The hospital wing was restricted, allowing only essential personnel near Sophia's room. Daniel canceled all visits from family and friends, citing exhaustion. Every nurse and doctor involved was sworn to confidentiality. But secrets, as Dr. Peterson had warned, never stayed hidden for long. It started with a whisper. A single photo, snapped by an anonymous hospital worker, circulated online. It was blurry, unclear, but it showed enough. A newborn with something unnatural protruding from his back. The caption was sensational. Baby born with wings, a miracle or an experiment? At first, it was dismissed as fake news, AI-generated nonsense, or a hoax. But then, someone inside the hospital confirmed it, an anonymous comment on a medical forum. The post went viral, and then chaos erupted. Within 24 hours, the hospital was swarmed. News vans, reporters, journalists, all trying to get a story. Some claimed it was a government experiment gone wrong. Others speculated divine intervention. Conspiracy theorists latched onto the idea of genetic mutations, secret scientific trials, or even extraterrestrial involvement. And then came the government interest. It started with subtle inquiries, calls from unidentified agencies, polite but firm questions about a unique birth case at the hospital. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, it was already too late. The escape. "We have to leave," Daniel said, urgency sharp in his voice. He had just gotten off the phone with a friend who worked in media. The leak was spreading faster than they could control, and soon they wouldn't have a choice. Sophia's heart pounded. Leave? Go where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find us. Dr. Peterson, who had been cooperative so far, looked conflicted. "I don't know if running is the right move. You need medical support?" Sophia cut him off. "We need to keep our son safe. That's our priority." Daniel had already made arrangements. A contact had secured a private safe house outside the city. They would leave tonight under the cover of darkness. By evening, the hospital's hallways were crawling with security, preventing unauthorized entry, but Sophia and Daniel knew that wouldn't last. If the wrong people got to them first, they didn't want to think about it. As the sun set, Daniel helped Sophia into a wheelchair, their baby wrapped tightly in soft blankets. With one final glance at Dr. Peterson, they moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors. "Good luck," Dr. Peterson murmured. And then they were gone. The road to nowhere. The drive was tense. Every car behind them felt like a tale, every streetlight a spotlight. Sophia clutched her baby, trying to keep him calm, though she was anything but. Daniel checked the rearview mirror for the 100th time. "We're almost there." The safe house was a secluded cabin, far from the city, hidden deep in the woods. When they finally arrived, relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. Because they weren't alone. A black SUV sat parked near the cabin, headlights off. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Someone's here," he whispered. Sophia held the baby closer. "Who?" A silhouette stepped out of the vehicle. As they came into view, Sophia's breath hitched. The woman was tall, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. She held up her hands in a non-threatening gesture. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said smoothly. "My name is Agent Monroe. I think it's time we talked." Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he studied the woman standing before them. The name Agent Monroe sent a cold shiver down his spine. There was something about her demeanor, calm, calculating, yet unreadable, that unsettled him. Sophia clutched their baby tighter, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had been bracing for this moment since the leak. Someone was always going to come for them. She just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Agent Monroe took slow, deliberate steps toward them, hands still raised in a display of peace. "Please, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter. I'm not here to harm you or your child. I'm here to protect you," Daniel scoffed. "Protect us? From what exactly? The people you work for?" Agent Monroe exhaled slowly. From everyone. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the dark tree line as if expecting company. You need to listen to me. Right now, you believe running will keep you safe, but the truth is, you're drawing more attention to yourselves. Every government agency, private research group, and radical conspiracy theorist is looking for you. You won't make it far without help. Sophia's breath hitched. They knew. How did you find us? Daniel asked, voice tight. Monroe gave a small, knowing smile. Let's just say you're not as invisible as you think. The moment that picture leaked, this situation became bigger than you. Right now, you need someone who can help you navigate it. Why should we trust you? Sophia asked, holding her baby closer. His tiny chest rose and fell against hers, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Because, Monroe said, lowering her voice, I'm not the only one looking for you. And I promise you, the others don't have your best interests in mind. Daniel exchanged a glance with Sophia. They didn't trust Monroe, but they couldn't ignore the growing danger. Staying out in the open was a risk. Give us one reason, Daniel said carefully, why we shouldn't just turn around and disappear. Monroe reached into her coat pocket slowly, retrieving a small, black device. She tossed it onto the hood of their car. Because they already know where you are. This is a GPS tracker found under your vehicle. Whoever put it there wanted to keep tabs on you, and they aren't my people. Sophia felt her stomach drop. They'd been followed. Tracked. The entire time. Daniel swore under his breath. He thought he had been so careful. Thought he had done everything right. But now it didn't matter. They're coming, Monroe said, her voice urgent now. If you don't leave with me, they'll find you before sunrise. Daniel looked at Sophia. This wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. Fine, he muttered. We go with you. But the second this feels like a trap, we're gone. Monroe nodded. Understood. Now, get in. They hesitated only for a moment before Sophia and Daniel climbed back into their car, following Monroe's black SUV into the unknown. The safe house. The drive was long and silent. Daniel kept his hands clenched around the steering wheel, stealing glances at Monroe's vehicle ahead. Sophia sat in the back, rocking their son, whispering softly to him. After what felt like hours, Monroe led them to a small, nondescript house nestled in the forest. It was unassuming, tucked away from the world, exactly what they needed. Daniel cut the engine and turned to Monroe as she stepped out of her SUV. Is this yours? She shook her head. It's a safe house. Not just for you. We've hidden people here before. That didn't sit right with Daniel. Who are you really protecting? Monroe hesitated before answering, as if choosing her words carefully. People like your son. Sophia's breath caught. You mean? Your baby isn't the first anomaly the world has seen. Silence settled between them. The weight of her words crashed down hard. What does that mean? Daniel asked. Monroe looked at the sleeping infant in Sophia's arms. It means he's special. But he's not alone. The others. Inside the safe house, Monroe led them to a hidden room, dimly lit and lined with confidential files. Stacks of paper, photographs, and documents marked classified sat on a large table in the center. Daniel scanned the files, his gut twisting. Pictures of other children, other anomalies. Some with unusual abilities, some with physical differences that defied science. They've been watching cases like these for years, Monroe explained. Most never make it to the public eye. Some disappear before anyone knows they exist. Sophia's arms tightened around her baby. Disappear, she echoed. Monroe nodded grimly. There are people who want to study them, control them. People who believe they are the key to something bigger. Like what? Evolution. Divinity. The next step for humanity. The theories vary, but the fact remains, your son is valuable to people you don't want to meet. Daniel felt his heart pound in his chest. They had known this situation was dangerous, but this was bigger than they had imagined. What happens now? He asked. Monroe leaned forward, her voice serious. You have two choices. One, you disappear completely. Change identities. Live off the grid. Never let anyone know your son exists. Sophia swallowed. And the second? Monroe's gaze was unreadable. You fight. Silence. Daniel looked at his son, so small, so vulnerable. Could they really live their entire lives on the run? Never letting him see the world, grow up free? And if they chose to fight, how? Sophia looked at Daniel, and in that moment, they both knew. Running wasn't an option anymore. They had to fight. For their son. For every child like him. And for the truth. Monroe studied them for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching for hesitation, fear, anything that would indicate they weren't fully committed to the path ahead. But she found none. Daniel and Sophia had made their choice. They were no longer just protecting their son, they were stepping into a war they hadn't even known existed. "All right," Monroe said, leaning forward, her voice low and steady. "If you're serious about this, we need to move fast. The people looking for you won't stop, and if they figure out where you are, you won't get another chance to disappear." Daniel exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "So, what do we do?" "You start by understanding what you're up against." Monroe grabbed a thick file from the stack and spread its contents on the table. Photographs, reports, surveillance images, it was all there. Names and locations connected by a network of red lines and annotations scribbled in the margins. There are groups that specialize in hunting people like you. Some are government-backed, others, private organizations with unlimited resources. Sophia's grip on her son tightened as she scanned the documents. "How long have they been watching us?" "Since before your son was born," Monroe admitted. "As soon as your hospital visit showed anything unusual, the red flags were raised. I intercepted your file before it reached the wrong hands, but it won't be long before someone else does too." Daniel swore under his breath. They had never stood a chance at hiding, not really. "How many others like us have made it?" Monroe hesitated. "Not enough." Sophia's heart sank. "And the ones who didn't?" Monroe didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed another folder on the table and flipped it open. Some were taken into research facilities under the guise of medical help. Others disappeared completely. Families torn apart, children lost to experiments, some never seen again. Daniel clenched his fists. "And you're saying we can stop this?" "You can do more than that," Monroe said. "You can expose them." Sophia frowned. "And how exactly do we do that? We have no power, no resources, no way to fight back." "You have something far more valuable," Monroe said, her gaze flickering to the sleeping baby in Sophia's arms. "Proof." Daniel shook his head. "You want us to turn our son into some kind of symbol? Put him in the spotlight and hope it keeps us safe?" Monroe held his stare. "No. I want you to take control of the narrative before someone else does. Right now, the only thing keeping your son from being taken is that they don't know exactly where he is. But once they do, your choices will be taken from you." Sophia bit her lip, her mind racing. "And what if we refuse? What if we just run, like you said?" Monroe sighed. "Then you'll be running for the rest of your lives. And sooner or later, they'll catch up." The weight of her words pressed down on them like a boulder. There was no easy way out of this. No simple escape. Whether they wanted it or not, they were in the middle of something much bigger than themselves. Daniel rubbed his temples. "If we do this, what's the plan?" Monroe's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "We expose them. But we do it on our terms." She slid another folder across the table. Inside were files, blueprints, and a list of names. People on the inside, people who had spent their lives covering up these cases. Journalists who had gotten too close. Doctors who had disappeared after speaking out. Government officials who had suddenly resigned with no explanation. "This is where we start," Monroe said. "We find these people. We get their stories. We make the world listen before they have a chance to silence us." Sophia met Daniel's gaze, searching for hesitation, doubt. But there was none. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with the same determination she felt in her own chest. "Okay," Daniel said. "Bryn." Monroe nodded. "Then we move now. Because the clock is already ticking." They gathered what they could, packing bags and burning anything that could be traced back to them. Within minutes, they were back on the road, heading toward the unknown. The fear still lingered, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, something else had begun to take root. They weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. And this time, they were ready. The drive was tense, the weight of their decisions settling over them like a thick fog. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain, but there was no turning back now. Monroe drove with precision, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds as if expecting someone to be following. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists. Sophia, in the back, held their baby close, his tiny breaths a steady rhythm against her chest. "Where are we going?" Daniel finally asked. Monroe didn't take her eyes off the road. "Contact. Someone who has been tracking these organizations for years. He has information we need. Can we trust him?" Sophia asked, her voice tight. Monroe hesitated. He's not the trusting type, but he's one of the few people who's managed to stay ahead of them. If anyone can help us, it's him. Silence fell over them again, the weight of the unknown pressing down. Sophia stroked her son's tiny hand, watching the world blur past the window. Her mind raced with possibilities, dangers, worst-case scenarios. Were they doing the right thing? Had they just made themselves even bigger targets? Hours passed before Monroe finally pulled into a secluded driveway, a cabin hidden deep in the woods. The place was old but sturdy, the windows reinforced, the security cameras tucked into the corners of the roof barely visible. Someone had gone through great lengths to keep this place off the grid. Monroe killed the engine and turned to them. "Stay close to me. And whatever happens, let me do the talking." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Great. That's not ominous at all." She ignored him, stepping out of the car and heading toward the door. She knocked 3 times in a precise rhythm. A long pause followed before the door creaked open just an inch, revealing a shadowed figure inside. "Monroe," a gruff voice greeted her. "You're either desperate or stupid." "A little of both," she admitted. "Can we come in?" The door opened wider, revealing a man in his late 50s, his graying beard unkempt, his eyes sharp with suspicion. He looked Daniel and Sophia over, his gaze lingering on the bundle in Sophia's arms. "That the kid?" he asked. Sophia instinctively took a step back, her body tensing. "Who are you?" she demanded. Monroe answered for him. "This is Reed. He's the reason you're still alive." Reed snorted. "Don't flatter me. I just delayed the inevitable." Daniel scowled. "Well, that's reassuring." Monroe motioned for them to enter. "We need your help." Reed sighed and stepped aside, letting them in. The inside of the cabin was cluttered but functional, maps, computers, files stacked high on every surface. The air smelled of coffee and burnt circuits, the hum of machines filling the space. Reed gestured toward the couch. "Sit." They hesitated before settling down. Monroe leaned against the table, arms crossed. They found the Carters. "It's only a matter of time before they close in." Reed grunted. "I warned you this would happen." Monroe's jaw tightened. "And I told you we'd fight back." Reed studied them for a long moment before shaking his head. "You really think you can take on people with unlimited resources? You think a couple of scared parents and a rogue agent are going to stop them?" "We have proof," Daniel said firmly. Reed laughed, a hollow sound. "Proof doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is control. And right now they have it." Sophia's stomach twisted. "Then what do we do?" Reed's eyes darkened. "You start by surviving." He pulled out a file and tossed it onto the table. "There's an old facility in the mountains. Abandoned, supposedly. But I have reason to believe they still use it for testing. If you want leverage, if you want to expose them, that's where you start." Monroe picked up the file, flipping through the pages. "This could be the break we need. Or it could get you killed," Reed muttered. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands over his face. "We don't have a choice, do we?" "No," Monroe said. "We don't." The room fell into silence. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, an eerie reminder of just how alone they were in this fight. Sophia held her baby closer, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. They were in this now. For better or worse, there was no turning back. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves outside the cabin. Inside, tension simmered beneath every breath, every glance exchanged between them. Monroe and Reed stood over a makeshift map, their fingers tracing roads, facilities, and hidden locations scrawled in red ink. Daniel sat at the table, his jaw clenched as he studied their surroundings, calculating every possible outcome. Sophia rocked their baby gently, her mind torn between fear and determination. "We go in at dawn," Monroe finally said, breaking the quiet. "If we wait any longer, we risk them catching wind of us." Reed didn't look up from the map. "You're assuming they haven't already. Places like this don't just sit dormant. Someone's watching." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Then we move fast." Reed scoffed. "Fast is what gets people killed." Sophia tightened her grip on their baby. "Then what do you suggest? We just wait for them to come to us?" Reed's eyes flickered toward her, his expression unreadable. "I suggest you understand what you're up against. This isn't some corporate scandal. These people don't play fair. If you screw this up, they'll erase you, your son, and anyone who's ever spoken your name." Monroe slammed her hand against the table. "We don't need a lecture, Reed. We need a plan." Reed sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine. But when this all goes south, don't say I didn't warn you." He reached under the table, pulling out a worn leather case. Popping it open, he revealed an array of equipment, communication devices, flash drives, old-school maps. He shoved one toward Monroe. "Take this. It's an encrypted drive. If you find anything that can blow this wide open, you upload it there." Daniel frowned. "And then what?" Reed's eyes met his. "Then you disappear." The words hung heavy in the air. Daniel and Sophia exchanged a look, one filled with questions neither of them had the answer to. Were they really ready for this? Could they afford not to be? Sophia swallowed hard. "And if we don't make it out?" Reed's expression darkened. "Then I make sure someone else does." The reality of what they were about to do sank into their bones. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back, exposing the truth, making sure no one else would have to go through what they had. Monroe closed the case with a snap. "We leave in 5 hours. Get some rest if you can." But none of them slept. Reed's voice came through, calm despite the chaos. "North Wing, emergency access tunnel. You have 90 seconds before full lockdown." Daniel gritted his teeth. 90 seconds. That was all they had. They turned a sharp corner, feet slamming against the concrete floor. Sophia held their baby close, shielding him from the cold air that rushed through the corridors. The child stirred in her arms but remained silent, as if sensing the danger. "Door ahead," Monroe shouted. They reached a thick metal door marked restricted access. Monroe wasted no time, pulling out another device and pressing it against the control panel. Sparks flew as the lock clicked open. They surged inside just as the facility doors slammed shut behind them. Lockdown initiated, a robotic voice echoed through the halls. "We made it," Daniel breathed, but Monroe shot him a sharp look. "Not yet." The emergency tunnel stretched out before them, narrow and dark, lined with exposed pipes and damp walls. It smelled of rust and old air, a forgotten passage beneath the facility. Reed's voice came through again. "Keep going straight. Exits at the far end. Surface hatch will put you 2 miles outside the perimeter." Daniel nodded, adjusting his grip on the encrypted drive. Everything they had risked, everything they had fought for, was inside this tiny piece of metal. Gunfire erupted behind them. "Move!" Monroe shouted. They sprinted forward as bullets ricocheted off the tunnel walls. Guards had forced their way in, their shouts growing louder as they gave chase. Sophia gasped as a bullet struck the pipe beside her, steam bursting into the air. Daniel grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward, his mind racing with survival instincts. Monroe stopped suddenly, spinning around. "Go!" she ordered. "What are you doing?" Daniel yelled. "Covering your damn exit," she snapped, raising her gun. Sophia hesitated for only a second before running, tears burning in her eyes. The sound of gunfire filled the tunnel, drowning out everything else. Daniel and Sophia kept moving, their lungs screaming for air. The hatch was up ahead, just as Reed had promised. Reed's voice came through again. "Ladder to your left. Get up there now." Daniel shoved the hatch open, daylight spilling in. He climbed up first, pulling Sophia up behind him as she cradled their son. As soon as they reached the surface, he slammed the hatch shut, locking it tight. Silence. The facility was hidden beneath them, deep underground, but they had made it. The encrypted drive was safe. The truth was safe. Sophia collapsed onto her knees, clutching their baby, her body shaking. Daniel pulled her close. It's over. But they both knew it was just the beginning. The morning arrived in a blur of whispered preparations and tightened nerves. The drive to the facility was long and winding, the dense forest pressing in on either side of the narrow road. Every turn felt like a step closer to something irreversible. Sophia's heart pounded as she looked down at her son, sleeping peacefully in her arms. He had no idea what they were walking into, no concept of the danger that lurked beyond the trees. Daniel reached over, squeezing her hand. We're going to be okay. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. Monroe pulled the car to a stop a few miles from the facility, cutting the engine. We go on foot from here. The air was cold, thick with tension as they stepped out, crunching softly against the damp forest floor. Reed handed out earpieces, his movements methodical, precise. Stay close. Stay quiet. And if I say run, you run. They moved through the woods in silence, the looming structure ahead barely visible through the morning fog. The facility was larger than they'd expected, its towering fences and dim security lights a stark contrast against the wilderness. Monroe motioned for them to crouch behind a fallen tree. We get in through the maintenance tunnels. If Reed's intel is good, that'll put us right under their main lab. Daniel nodded, gripping the strap of his backpack. And if it's not? Reed smirked. Then we improvise. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the tunnel entrance. Monroe knelt by the rusted grate, pulling a tool from her belt and working at the bolts. The sound of metal scraping echoed in the still air. Then, a snap. The grate came loose. Monroe exhaled sharply. Daniel turned to Sophia. Stay close to me. She nodded, cradling their son as they slipped inside. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the air thick with the scent of rust and mold. Their footsteps were barely audible, their breaths controlled. Every step deeper felt like another pull into the unknown. Then, light ahead. A door. Monroe held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. She pressed a finger to her earpiece. Reed? Static. Then, a whisper. 2 guards. 10 meters. Keep left. She nodded, motioning for them to move. They hugged the wall, inching forward, barely daring to breathe. Then, a voice. Footsteps. Daniel's heart pounded. If they were caught now, there would be no second chances. They froze in place, hearts pounding in unison as the heavy footsteps grew closer. Monroe pressed herself against the wall, signaling for everyone to stay still. Daniel clenched his fists, his body tensed, ready to act if necessary. Sophia's grip on their baby tightened as she held her breath, praying that he wouldn't wake up and cry at the worst possible moment. The guards passed by slowly, their murmured conversation breaking the silence. The higher-ups want everything wiped by the end of the week. We're shutting this place down for good. Yeah, well, good riddance. This place gives me the creeps. They continued down the tunnel, their voices fading into the distance. Monroe exhaled softly, motioning for them to move. We have to be fast, she whispered. If they're cleaning up, that means they're getting rid of evidence. Reed's voice crackled in their earpieces. You've got about 20 minutes before shift rotation. After that, you're on borrowed time. They pressed forward, careful with each step. The tunnel opened into a dimly lit maintenance room lined with metal shelves and old, rusted equipment. A single door led deeper inside. Monroe moved quickly, pulling a small device from her pocket and pressing it against the keypad beside the door. A soft beep. A click. The door unlocked. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't even want to know how you got that. Monroe smirked. Smart man. She pushed the door open just enough for them to slip inside. The hallway beyond was colder, sterile, and lined with security cameras. Reed's voice came through again. Camera blind spots are marked on your map. Follow the path exactly. One wrong step and they'll know you're there. They moved carefully, keeping to the edges of the hall, ducking beneath cameras when needed. Every step felt like walking on a razor's edge. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. Finally, they reached another secured door. Monroe worked quickly, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she bypassed the lock. The door slid open, revealing a large, windowless room filled with rows of computer terminals. Screens flickered with data, security footage, and research logs. "This is it," Monroe breathed. Daniel moved to one of the terminals, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Come on. Lines of code scrolled rapidly as he accessed the system. Files upon files of classified reports, experimental logs, and footage of tests conducted in the facility. His stomach twisted at what he saw. Sophia gasped softly. "Oh my God!" Videos played on the screen. Subjects in containment, being monitored, studied. Some were infants. Others were fully grown. All of them different. "This is proof," Daniel whispered. "Everything they've been doing, it's all here." Monroe pulled the encrypted drive from her pocket. "We copy everything and get out?" Daniel inserted the drive and started the transfer. The screen flashed, downloading. 15% complete. Too slow. Come on, he muttered, his fingers drumming against the desk. A noise outside. Reed's voice came through. "You've got company. 2 guards headed your way." Monroe cursed. "We need more time." Sophia's breath hitched. "We can't leave without this." Daniel checked the progress. 40% complete. The footsteps grew louder. Monroe pulled a small pistol from her holster. "Get ready." The door's keypad beeped. Someone was unlocking it. Sophia clutched her son tightly, pressing herself into the corner. The door swung open. 2 guards stepped in, rifles slung over their shoulders. The first one barely had time to react before Monroe slammed the butt of her pistol into his throat. He stumbled back, gasping for air, but she was already moving, swift, calculated. She caught the second guard by the wrist, twisting sharply, forcing him to drop his weapon. Daniel lunged, grabbing the fallen rifle, his hands shaking. The first guard was recovering fast, his hand reaching for his radio. A single shot rang out. Silence. Monroe stood over the now unconscious guards, breathing hard. "They'll know something's wrong." Daniel turned back to the screen. 80% complete. Almost there. Sophia trembled, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. They were out of time. Reed's voice came through. "You've got 1 minute before this place goes on full lockdown." Daniel clenched his teeth. "Come on." 100% complete. Transfer successful. He yanked the drive from the computer. Monroe grabbed his arm. "Move." "No." They sprinted for the exit, alarms beginning to blare through the halls. Red warning lights flashed, sirens echoing around them. Guards would be swarming the facility in seconds. Their escape had just begun. They ran through the dimly lit corridors, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding like war drums. The alarms screamed through the facility, a piercing wail that shattered the silence and signaled the hunt. Red warning lights flickered on the walls, casting eerie shadows as Monroe led them through the maze-like structure, her grip tight around the pistol in her hand. "Reed, we need an exit, now," she barked into her earpiece.